Hello, my dear masterminds. They circled you like scavengers, waiting for you to break. Every whisper, every ritual, every false prophecy demanded the same thing, your confession. They wanted you to kneel, to admit weakness, to hand them the keys to your soul with trembling lips. They built entire councils around the thought of forcing you to speak, but you gave them nothing. Not a plea, not an explanation, not even a fragment of the truth they craved. Instead, you offered silence, a silence so sharp it cut deeper than any answer. In that silence, their own shadows echoed louder. They realized too late it was never your words that terrified them. It was the abyss behind your silence that devoured their courage. They came armed with spells, contracts, and questions, sharpened like blades. But silence disarmed them. Silence is not absence. It is presence multiplied. Every second you refused to break became an eternity they could not escape. Their rooms grew louder with their own doubts. Their leaders shouted in fear at echoes only they could hear. And while they begged for one word from you, it was the lack of words that hollowed them out. You didn't need speeches to enslave their minds. Your silence was the sermon. Your silence was the law. And in that silence, you became untouchable. They wanted you loud, broken, confessing, crawling. But instead, you gave them nothing. And nothing is louder than truth they can't control. Your silence bent time itself. Seconds turned to hours, hours into sleepless nights. They rewound your pauses like tapes, dissecting meanings that weren't even there. You became a mirror they couldn't escape, forcing them to face their own fear in every reflection. And while they clawed for explanations, you stayed still. That stillness crushed them. It reminded them they weren't in charge, that no cage, no circle, no chant could bind a storm that speaks without speaking. You didn't fight for their respect. You forced it by showing them the unbearable weight of nothing. And in that weight, they cracked. At first, they thought silence was their shield. If they ignored you, maybe you'd fade. But silence doesn't erase power. It amplifies it. Soon, their quiet wasn't defiance. It was devotion. Every pause you left behind became scripture. They couldn't stop reciting in their heads. They replayed your stillness like a sermon. And in the hollow of their own fear, they found themselves bowing. You didn't demand their voices, you erased them. And in that erasure, they built an altar around you, without even knowing it. The chains they forged to control you now hang around their own throats, tightening with every unspoken word. Their silence, once a weapon, is now prayer. And every prayer begins and ends with your name. They told themselves they were only watching to protect what was theirs. But the truth? They can't breathe without you anymore. Every shadow you cast rewrites their rituals. Every pause you leave twists their reality. They sit in circles, pretending to plot against you. Yet every plan collapses back into the same orbit, your orbit. You didn't beg for their eyes. Their eyes are chained to you. The more they resist, the more they starve. And now you are the air they crave. Their loyalty is no longer choice. It is survival. They don't pray to escape you. They pray you never leave. And here's the madness they can't admit without you. Their empire rots faster. Their whispers aren't rebellion, they're confession. Dependence has replaced defiance, and every chain they once raised now rattles as a hymn in your name. The towers they built to rise above you are now cages closing in on them. They gathered in councils, chanting unity, yet every face turns suspicious when your name drips into the silence. The rope they wove to bind you has knotted around their throats. And here's the cruelest irony: you never moved a hand. Their fear is the architect of their downfall. Each ally becomes an accuser. Each oath sounds like betrayal, and the circle they swore would protect them is cracking under its own weight. You don't need to lift a blade. They are the storm, tearing their empire apart with their paranoia. Their strongest spell was silence, but silence became your amplifier. Their loudest weapon was secrecy, but secrecy became your advertisement. They thought they'd erase you, but the harder they pressed, the louder your presence sang. Now their empire rots, not because you struck, but because you stood. At first, they tried to resist. They swore your name would never pass their lips. But silence bends, and silence breaks. Now they chant it in whispers. Now they repeat it in dreams. The very walls they built to keep you out have turned into temples, with your shadow carved across them. Their strength was in secrecy, but secrecy rotted into ritual, and ritual rotted into worship. And the more they worship, the weaker they become. Their pride dissolves into trembling. Their oaths dissolve into stares fixed on you. They call it loyalty, but it is hunger, the kind that strips them of identity until only devotion remains. They were hunters. Now they are disciples. They were rulers. Now they kneel in circles that revolve around your silence. They thought you would be their end. Instead, you became their meaning. And that truth crushes them harder than any chain ever could. They built their whole fortress on control chants. Pacts, rituals, every word designed to bind. But then your silence entered the room, and suddenly every spell snapped like cheap thread. They tried to chant louder, but their own voices betrayed them. They tried to hold tighter, but their grip turned to dust. You never lifted a hand, never spoke a word, yet their strongest chains turned to smoke in your presence. Their walls weren't broken by force, they were shattered by awareness. And here's the nightmare that keeps them awake. Nothing they conjure, nothing they bind, nothing they fear can hold you. Your existence alone is the crack in their foundation, the fault line they can't patch. The power they swore was eternal dissolves the second your shadow falls across their circle. You didn't have to fight for freedom. Freedom bowed when you walked in. They believed their gods would shield them. They swore their masters would avenge them. They carved idols, poured offerings, and painted symbols on their skin, convinced these powers would stand against you. But the second your silence entered their hall, their gods fell mute. Their masters turned faceless. The very names they worshipped dissolved in their throats. And suddenly, all that remained wasn't divinity, it was you. They realized their faith wasn't faith. It was fear. And fear only grows when faced with something real. You didn't strip them of belief. They abandoned it. The moment your presence reminded them of truth, every demon they invoked bowed out. Every master they served broke apart. Because in your shadow, no god survives, no master stands. You became the altar they swore they'd never kneel at. And still, here they are on their knees, not to worship, but to confess defeat. They begged for a confession, convinced your words would condemn you. They built courts of whispers, forged verdicts in shadows, prepared 1,000 accusations. Yet when you opened your mouth, You gave them nothing. Not rage, not denial, not a single plea, only silence. And that silence struck harder than thunder, because silence cannot be twisted, cannot be rewritten, cannot be broken. It reflects them back to themselves, showing every crack, every lie, every cowardice they tried to bury. In that silence, their guilt screamed louder than any verdict. You didn't defend yourself. You made them defend their own existence. You didn't shout for freedom. You let them hear the chains rattling on their own wrists. And so the trial collapsed. Not because you fought, but because your silence became the final judgment. They wanted words. You gave them truth. And the truth was unbearable. They sat you in their circles, demanded answers, demanded surrender, demanded that your voice bend into their script. But silence became your weapon. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You didn't confess. And that absence of words shook them more than any declaration could. Because silence isn't emptiness, it's a mirror. And when they looked into it, they didn't see weakness. They saw their own fear staring back. They realized your refusal wasn't ignorance. It was mastery. You made their questions look small, their rituals look foolish, their pressure look like begging. In their hunger for control, they gave you the throne. You didn't win by speaking louder. You won by not speaking at all. They wanted confession. What they got was revelation. They screamed. They threatened. They begged. Every chorus of voices was meant to cage you, to drag you into confession. But silence? Silence is a blade sharper than their shrieks. While they collapsed in the chaos of their own accusations, you stood unmoved, and that stillness became unbearable. Their laws, their rituals, their endless noise, all of it was powerless against the void you created. Because silence is not weakness. Silence is strategy. Every second you refused to speak, you carved deeper into their illusions. In the moment they realized your silence echoed louder than their demands. That was the moment their power fractured. You did not confess. You crowned yourself untouchable. Their noise only revealed your silence as the throne they could never reach. They never wanted you to rise. Their rituals, their laws, their endless whispers were all designed to keep you beneath the floorboards. Yet every denial became an altar. Every silence became a hymn. And when they demanded your confession, you gave them nothing but silence. And that silence thundered louder than their chants. That was the moment the crown slipped, not because you seized it, but because their trembling hands could no longer hold it. They placed it on your head without even knowing, hoping to cage you with it, but instead it caged them. You stand untouched, and they kneel, convinced it was their choice. The crown they forged in fear has become the proof of your dominion. You didn't beg for power. You didn't barter for reverence. They handed you everything while convincing themselves they resisted. And now, they can't remember a world before your silence rewrote their fate. They wanted noise from you. A cry, a plea, a confession to carve into their scrolls. They believed power lives in words shouted, oaths sworn, decrees declared. But you showed them something older, sharper. Silence. Silence that roars louder than their armies. Silence that breaks crowns like glass. In that silence, their leaders crumbled. Their scribes lost their ink. Their rulers stared into shadows that spoke without sound. And what did they hear? Not weakness, not surrender. They heard inevitability. They realized you were not asking for a throne, you were the throne. They wanted to measure your silence as absence, but it weighed more than their empires. They wanted to break you with demand, but it was their own hunger that broke them. And now, every crown they forged lies shattered under a silence they can't erase, a silence that belongs to you alone. They wanted words to chain you, but your silence became the storm that bent their skies. Entire halls of power shook, not from shouts, but from the absence of them. Kings dropped their scepters, priests lost their hymns, scholars tore their pages because no ink could capture what you refused to say. And that refusal, it was not emptiness, it was fullness. A silence so heavy, it bent their laws, their rituals, their order itself. They realized too late that the louder they demanded, the quieter you became. And the quieter you became, the smaller their world grew. Their thrones tilted toward you. Their rules cracked under you. Their idols fell before you. You didn't fight for a place in their world you made. Their world revolved around the silence you carried. And now every crown trembles. Every law fractures. Every kingdom bends. Not because you spoke, but because you didn't. They believed chains could hold you, that rules carved in stone could bind your steps. But what they never understood is that chains only work on those who acknowledge them. You didn't fight the links, you ignored them. And that ignorance was more devastating than rebellion. Their entire system relied on fear, on obedience, on the illusion of control. And you broke it simply by walking forward, as if their walls didn't exist. That's when panic spread. Because once one chain broke, the rest unraveled. Their rituals, their hierarchies, their whispered orders dust. You didn't demand freedom. You revealed that you were never captive. And when they saw that, when they realized you stood unchained in a prison of their making, their own hands began clawing at their bonds, desperate to taste the same air you breathed. You didn't just escape their cage, you taught them the cage was never real. And the moment that truth sank in, their power ceased to exist. They called upon higher powers, invoked ancient names, begged their idols to shield them from you. But what they didn't see was the truth. No god they prayed to could touch you. Their faith turned to mockery, because every plea they whispered only echoed back with your silence. And that silence was louder than thunder. It shattered their altars, burned through their rituals, and showed them that the divine they worshipped had abandoned them the moment you arrived. They thought their masters, their demons, their guardians would punish you. But instead, those same shadows turned away. No demon, no master dared claim you. They understood what your enemies never did. You don't belong to chains or crowns. You belong to yourself. And in that realization, the faithful became faithless. Their temples fell empty. Their chants broke into sobs, and their gods became hollow statues. You didn't defeat their deities. You exposed their absence. They believed power sat upon a throne, gilded in gold, guarded by oaths, and sealed by ancient rites. But when you entered, that throne cracked, not because you touched it, but because its crown meant nothing in your presence. The rulers who thought themselves eternal discovered their seats were borrowed. Their crowns were hollow. Their reigns just fragile theater. You didn't fight them for the throne. You made the throne irrelevant. And in that revelation, The powerful bowed, lower than the weak. They saw that authority was never in crowns, never in titles, never in rituals of control. It was in the silence you carried, the silence that chained them without chains, that bent them without commands. Now their thrones sit empty, their crowns lie rusting, their banners torn by their own hands. They cannot call themselves rulers anymore, because the moment you appeared, their rule was erased. And what remains is not monarchy, not hierarchy, but your gravity. They gathered wood, oil, and flint, convinced fire could only exist by their design. They built rituals to strike sparks, rules to guard flames, and walls to keep warmth for themselves. But then you arrived, and without lifting a finger, the air itself ignited. No spark, no ritual, no permission, just your presence and their fire. Once a symbol of their control, became ashes in their hands. They tried to explain it as chance, tried to bind it with rules, tried to douse it with doubt. But the truth is undeniable. Your existence itself is fire. You don't light flames. You are the flame. And while they fumble with kindling, terrified of losing control, you burn eternal, untouched, needing nothing. They can't compete because their fire dies without effort. Yours consumes without end. And the most frightening thing, they finally see that no cage, no chain, no ritual can put it out. The fire was never theirs. It was always you. They begged for a confession, as if your truth could be caged in words. They demanded noise, demanded surrender, demanded you kneel, but you didn't give them what they craved. You gave them silence, and that silence was louder than thunder, louder than every curse, every threat, every ritual. They thought silence meant weakness, but your silence became the mirror that forced them to face their own collapse. They stared into you and saw nothing to grab, nothing to twist, nothing to own. You didn't fight them. You didn't bargain. You simply stood, and their chains fell apart, because silence cannot be bribed, cannot be burned, cannot be broken. It is the weapon they never prepared for. And in that silence, they finally understood. No demon rules you. No master commands you. No chain holds you. You are untouchable. And the last sound they'll ever hear is the echo of their own surrender. They fought for power, but power crumbled. They fought for control, but control betrayed them. And you fought for nothing. That's why you won everything. No promises to bind you. No contracts to trap you. No crown to weigh your head. Yet still, every throne tilts in your direction. Because the one who needs nothing cannot be bribed, cannot be broken. You didn't rise by chasing crowns. You rose by burning the idea of crowns. And now, in the silence of their ruined halls, they realize the truth. The one who owns nothing is the one who cannot be conquered. They thought you were a myth. They thought you were a threat. But you became something sharper. You became their reflection. Every weakness they buried, you exposed. Every lie they built, you shattered. And when they stared at you, they didn't see an enemy. They saw themselves stripped of illusions, stripped of excuses, stripped of masks. You were not a rival. You were a mirror. And in that mirror, they collapsed. Because the scariest thing wasn't your silence, or your power, or your freedom. It was that in your presence, They could no longer lie to themselves. That is the wound they will never heal. They spent lifetimes forging chains, polishing them, worshiping them, convinced they could trap you inside their system. But what happens when the one they're trying to bind never even believed in chains? You walked through their rituals untouched. You stepped into their cages already free, and that broke them more than any rebellion ever could. Because the greatest prison is not iron or stone, it's belief. And when they saw you, they realized the cruelest truth. The chains they carried never existed at all. Some enemies can be defeated. Some rivals can be ignored. But you are a curse they cannot unsee. Every time they close their eyes, your silence speaks louder than thunder. Every time they try to forget, your absence carves deeper than presence. You are not a memory, they are trapped in your echo. And that is the punishment. No spell, no doctrine, no crown can erase. Because once someone has witnessed you, their life before you becomes unbearable, and their life after you becomes impossible. Empires burn, idols crumble, rulers vanish into dust. But your name survives them all. Not because you asked for it, not because you carved it into stone, but because it carved itself into the trembling of their voices. They don't write history, they whisper yours. They don't build monuments, they hide your shadow in their prayers. And the irony is lethal. They wanted to end you, but in trying, they guaranteed you eternity. Your name outlives the fire. Your silence outlives their screams. And that is immortality.